Today is November 19, 2011. This service is coming to you on the internet from 380 West 1st Street, Elmira, New York, Ray of Hope Church. We are now in our 29th year of ministry. It is the Feast of Christ the King, the last Sunday in the church year. It is the 22nd Sunday of marriage equality in New York State. And we are counting each and every one of the Sundays of marriage equality until every state has this right. And in today's sermon, we will bring your attention to some very well organized efforts against marriage equality, one of which happened last night, that are being funded specifically by openly self-declaring conservative Christian organizations. So this is why it is a church issue. This is why we have to talk about it. We would rather not talk about politics, but we are being blindsided by the reconstructionist movement. One organization, which I'll tell you more about in the sermon, is on track to raise $20 million for political efforts this year and through the 2012 election cycle to turn back rights of LGBT persons. This is no joke. And the more that the progressive and moderate churches ignore these things, and progressive and moderate persons ignore these things, the more we are playing directly into their agenda. How does that relate to the Feast of Christ the King? Very simply, to understand any church's theology, philosophical and political agendas, one has to understand how that church sees the kingdom of Christ. And the self-named, self-appointed, self-defined conservative Christian movement is part of a socio-political theological movement called reconstructionism. They see Christ the King in the moment. They see that Christ the King is giving them kingdom power to take the kingdoms of the world governmental systems, and to convert them and cause them to be conservative Christian governments. And it takes no effort to realize which political party has lined right up, put their toes on the line, to agree with this philosophy in their attempt to gain power over all three branches of our current federal government. One party is definitely, absolutely committed to that agenda. The other party is not. But unfortunately, the party that is moderate and liberal, so-called, is not taking seriously the machinery that's behind this Kingdom for Christ agenda. So we're going to talk about today three different philosophies of the kingship of Christ and how those three philosophies are played out in the political arena here in the United States of America. So this is a defining moment in our story, and the implications of what will happen in 2012 reach 20, 30, 40 years into the future of the United States of America. This is a very, very important thing. Churches around the country today will either be completely ignoring this, or there'll be political, almost campaigning type of sermons to row people up for the particular political party, which will be self-exposed when I read the articles to you later. Ray of Hope Church is very careful not to put our tax-exempt religious status in jeopardy by how we approach these things. We do not endorse any particular candidates, but we must have the discussion. We do support President Obama because he's president, not because he's simultaneously a candidate. But he is the President of the United States. And as such, and as respect for the office, we do support what the President of the United States is trying to do. And so, you know, that's why we can talk about what President Obama is trying to do. So, this is an important moment. It's interesting to note that the theology that's in front of us today on the church calendar, the Feast of Christ the King, is also very, very pertinent to our moment, this moment, where we are in the story of the United States of America. So it's good that we're here, it's good that we're listening, and let us pray the Holy Spirit will open our hearts, and let us begin by giving God thanks and praise. The way that a church interprets, or a denomination, or religion, interprets the kingship of Christ has everything to do with how they participate in the political arena, which includes morals, and specifically lawmaking. Especially when they identify their country as an Islamic country, or as a Christian country, or as a Christian Judeo country, which is what some try to identify the United States as, even though what we have written in our governmental documents is that the government will not select any particular religion to make it a national religion. Therefore, we have religious freedom. But some are trying to define our country by a supposed Judeo-Christian tradition and a very specific version of that. And they do that based upon the idea of how they see the end-time drama and the place of the Christ and the church in that drama. Today's gospel reading, the judgment of the sheep and the goats, most churches interpret as a sudden, unexpected, end-time cataclysmic judgment, where suddenly Christ appears, and all nations are gathered before Christ, and everyone is raised from the dead, and everybody finds out who was a sheep and who was a goat. And Christ sits on this great big throne and plays out everyone's life before everybody else. Imagine how long this would take. And then judges whether or not you were following Christ or you weren't. And if you weren't, in front of everybody, you're sent to hell forever. And if you were, in front of everybody, you are welcomed into the pearly gates where you float forever. Now, this is what every mainline church teaches. And it's called the final judgment, or the last judgment. It's the subject of the painting, the famous painting in the Sistine Chapel behind the high altar, the very chapel where every pope is chosen. It is the centerpiece of every mainline church's eschatology, end-time teaching. Then there is another interpretation which some Protestant churches teach, and this would be the conservative Protestant churches. They call themselves conservative. They sometimes call themselves evangelicals. This interpretation is that when Christ comes in Matthew 25, it means to the earth. And he will judge when he comes to clean up what's left on the earth of anybody who is not conservative Christian, if there are anyone left. But in that same interpretation, what they say is he cannot return until they have successfully converted the whole world to that religio-political system, which they call conservative Christianity, red, white, and blue. They see the United States as the agent to spread that Christian faith to the entire world. That's why the United States was formed in the first place. And they call it a Judeo-Christian tradition not because there's any respect for the Jews. The respect for the Jews is in as much as they cooperate to eventually become Christian so that Christ can come. So, you know, they play a friendship with the state of Israel. CBN network is always talking about Israel this and Israel that. But in reality, if you listen closely, the only reason that they support Israel is to keep the Muslims out because they're trying to push Christ to hurry up and come back. But it isn't because they have any specific respect for the Jews. All Jews are expected to become Christian according to conservative Christian churches. These are the people that are deeply involved in politics. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. There's also a very, very small group of Christians, and they are called the premillennial churches. And what they're saying is, Christ will return to the earth indeed. And when this judgment that's referred to here in Matthew 25 happens, it will be of the living nations at the end of the tribulation period, 7 years after the end of the church age. That 7 years will have been under the leadership of the Antichrist in the world. So when Christ comes to the earth in Matthew 25, verses 31 to 45, today's gospel, he gathers the nations that are on the earth at that time and judges between those that followed the Antichrist and those who didn't. And specifically to the Jewish people who are raised from the dead at that time, he says, "Come into the kingdom prepared for you by my Father before the foundations of the earth." And then there is a messianic 1,000-year kingdom on the physical earth. This is in the future. In our second reading today, 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verses 20 to 28. St. Paul talks about that kingdom and says, after that kingdom has run its course, i.e. of 1,000 years, then Christ gives the kingdom to God. So it isn't ever that Christ intends to rule some kingdom forever and ever. There is a kingdom coming, but it's a 1,000-year reign. And 1 Corinthians 15 says, at the end of that, Christ gives the kingdom back to God. And it says, so that God may be all in all. Which is apparently how the creation was in the first place. So it's a huge circle, returning to all in all, whatever that means. One thing it won't mean is there will not be any more sin, sickness, and death. Can't imagine it. So, what the mainline churches are doing, beginning with the papal agenda, is transferring that kingdom to the church age now. And they're saying the church is the kingdom. The Jews are out of the picture. And so if it's the papal agenda, which the Methodists, the Lutherans, the Episcopalians, the Presbyterians have all just adapted, they never challenged it. They reformed, yes, but they kept the papal agenda. They believe that the church is the kingdom of God. To that I say, can't you tell? If the church is the kingdom of God, with all of its imperfections, then anybody that's on the fence about believing looks at the church and says, well, why believe if this is the kingdom? And so many, many churches today on the Feast of Christ the King, they're saying Christ is king now in heaven and ruling on the earth through the beautiful church. So in the verses where in the Matthew 25 judgment where Christ says, when I was hungry, you gave me food, or you didn't. When I was thirsty, you gave me drink, or you didn't. And when I was naked, you clothed me. That's why all these churches go crazy to have church dinners, to have pantries, to have clothing pantries, and they do all this social services. You think it's because they're being nice. No, it's not. They're doing it because they're trying to make sure that when the judgment comes, they get in. The poor is their ticket to heaven. Did I say that? Yes, I did. That's the only reason they have free turkey dinners on Thursday, is so that that church can say, there, we did it, we fed the poor. That's the only reason they have clothing pantries, or whatever they call them. And then name them Good Samaritan. See, and unfortunately, a lot of times churches that have all of these social services, they don't really care that some people, that locks those people into a lifelong lifestyle of services oriented. Those people never get up and get going. The church doesn't care if they put people into that lifestyle and enable them into take. The church doesn't care, because all those people really are to them is their ticket to heaven. We did it. We fed the hungry. We clothed the naked. We let everybody in the door. We welcomed the stranger. Ha ha, God, you've got to put us into heaven. And it's all a huge misinterpretation of this Matthew reading. What Jesus was specifically talking about here. If you read all of Matthew 24 and all of Matthew 25, you find out that this judgment is right after he talks about the Antichrist ruling the world. Because while the Antichrist will rule the world during the 7-year tribulation, the Jews, the real Jews, are going to experience the worst persecution they have ever experienced. In the Bible, it's called the time of Jacob's trouble. And during that time, the new world government is going to turn on the Jews and make Hitler look like a beginner. When that happens, some people will hide and protect the Jews. Those are the people he's talking to. When I was persecuted, you welcomed me. When I was hungry, you fed me. When I was naked, you clothed me. When? During the rule of the Antichrist. That's what he's talking about. That's the context. When you take that judgment out of that context and you make it some big final Michelangelo painting, last judgment for the end of time, you can make it mean anything you want it to mean. And so all these churches have these huge social programs because they think they're fulfilling that gospel. It's out of context. Should we feed the hungry? Should we clothe the naked? Yes, we should, but we should also help people help themselves. You know, if the same people are coming to the food pantry who were coming here 25 years ago, something's wrong. If the same, you know, I mean, except those who really and truly, you know, have issues that need that sort of help. But every social service agency is bogged down by people who get stuck in that pattern, who could get out of that pattern. That's all I'm saying about it. But as you know, we are very interested in what is happening in the fight for marriage equality for every person in the United States. And it's that second group that is very, very involved in this. The so-called self-named, self-determined, self-defined conservative Christians. And as we've said in every one of these videos, you can read all about them by simply doing a Google search for Dominion Theology, Christian right. I think it's the Faith and Family, or Faith and Freedom Coalition, which is now, it's a revision of the Christian Coalition. Ralph Reed, search that. There's so many things. Well, they're up and running, and they're marrying themselves to one particular political party. Make no mistake about it. I can say this because it's a fact. This particular group of churches believes it is their agenda to get President Obama out of the White House. And for all the reasons that you all well know. None of them have anything to do with job performance. Human Rights Campaign, new magazine for fall 2011, which the link is now on your screen for. On page 7, has 3 short articles that tell it all. So I'm going to read them. First one, prospective U.S. military chaplains. Many who are evangelical Christians, prospective chaplains, are seeking out in record numbers Liberty Theological University. Anybody want to tell me what that's associated with? Liberty University is where the Christian Coalition started, folks. Liberty Theological University, the Lynchburg, Virginia school founded by the late Reverend Jerry Falwell. He is the founder of the Christian Coalition. He is the starting point of the reconstructionist movement that we've been talking about now clearly for 22 Sundays. This is the guy. This is the place where they're recruiting chaplains from. An article in the St. Louis Post-Dispatch said, Liberty University has endorsed 180 chaplains or chaplain candidates, one school official said. During the battle over the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, it was the military chaplaincy corps who voiced the most vociferous opposition to its repeal. Liberty graduates were among the loudest voices. See, but they don't use the word reconstructionist here. They don't go far enough to help people figure out why. Recently, the Chaplain Alliance for Religious Liberty, a coalition representing 2,000 evangelical Christian military chaplains, 2,000 evangelical military Christian military chaplains, many from Liberty University, has said its members will not perform homosexual wedding ceremonies. Meanwhile, the number of military chaplains from Christian and Jewish mainline denominations, many of whom actively worked for the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, is declining. That's why HRC's Religious and Faith program is a sponsor and member of the Forum on Military Chaplaincy, a 30-member group, as opposed to 2,000-member group, a 30-member group developing ways to encourage progressive seminaries to train their students for military chaplaincy, as well as to help current chaplains better minister to LGBT service members' needs. Well, moderate and progressive seminaries, for some reason, come up with the idea that they shouldn't support military personnel. They confuse the military agenda with the people. You know, so many of these young people have been recruited into the military for employment. It's one of the main reasons so many young people go into the military. They're looking at the current employment field and prospects, and the recruiter says, but if you come work for us, we'll give you money to go to college. We'll give you, all these benefits. So that's the main reason young people are going into the military. So think about this. They go in there at 18 years old, and they're educated immediately by conservative evangelical pastors who will not perform same-sex marriages, even though it's the law. So if a student comes from, military personnel comes from New York State, where it is allowed, and has one of these pastors, he's going to still be told, you can't be gay, you've got to convert. This is against God's will. The state is wrong. And the military chaplains work for you and me. They're chaplains in the military. We pay their salaries. And yet they're bringing the Liberty University Christian Coalition agenda into the military. Do you see the problem here? Mm-hmm. This is big. Next article. NAM exposed again. Well, we've talked about NAM. Who's NAM?
The Organization for Marriage.
The National Organization for Marriage. Here we go. A federal court judge appointed by then President George W. Bush recently ruled against an affiliate of the National Organization of Marriage who wanted to keep private the names of petition signers to an anti-LGBT election campaign. The judge, in fact, shredded one of the longest held arguments made by anti-gay activists in the United States. What is that argument? Here it is. Gays are bullies and harassers, said Kevin Nix, HRC's NOM project director, in the Huffington Post. In brief, NOM and one of its affiliates wanted to repeal a domestic partnership law 2 years ago in Washington state. They gathered the needed number of signatures to put repeal on the ballot, but voters overwhelmingly decided to keep the law intact. However, the NOM crew demanded that the 138,000 signatures that signed against the freedom to marry remain under seal. So after these people signed these petitions and lost the election, then they wanted their names sealed. Okay? This is how the conservative Christians work. They're never right up front. They're always hiding behind things. If the names were publicly disclosed, gay people would threaten, harass, and intimidate the signers, NOM argued. Then why did you sign it in the first place if you weren't willing to stand up for what you sat well? The U.S. Supreme Court soundly rejected that argument, and recently Judge Benjamin Settle threw out NOM's case, citing no credible evidence. Unfortunately, vilifying the LGBT community has also surfaced in the, I'm just reading this, has also surfaced in the GOP presidential primary. Nix warned on his posting. Most GOP candidates signed a pledge to support a constitutional ban on gay marriage. Did you hear that? Now, Ray of Hope didn't say this. HRC.
This is the second time you've read a stat from somewhere else.
Oh, I'm going to read it the third time because something happened last night.
I heard that already.
Most GOP candidates signed a pledge to support a constitutional ban on gay marriage. A constitutional ban. What was unexpected and got little press, though, was each candidate's promise to set up a McCarthy-like presidential commission to investigate alleged incidents of harassment toward those opposed to marriage equality. See www.huffingtonpost.com/Kevin-Nix, which is now on your screen. Visit HRC's nomexposed.org for more. The National Organization for Marriage's chairman has claimed it is on track to raise $20 million this year to fund its efforts against marriage equality, up from $2.9 million 3 years ago. That is up, I would say. NOM says it will spend $2 million in New York State to defeat GOP legislators who voted for marriage equality. This is why we have to discuss this. One more. Page 7. This is HRC's Fall Magazine. $1.5 million. That's how much American taxpayers will pay to defend the Anti-Gay Defense of Marriage Act. I pay taxes. People think clergy do not pay taxes. Yes, I do. My taxes are going to defend the Anti-Gay Defense of Marriage Act. I don't like that. I have to tell my representatives I don't like that. My money is going to defend something against my own best interest. Shortly after President Obama declared earlier this year that he would no longer defend DOMA, U.S. House Speaker John Boehner, Republican Ohio, unveiled a contract to hire a private attorney and devote $500,000 to defending the federal law. So So the president says that the federal government, current government, would not any longer defend DOMA. So the Republican majority leader says, well then we'll do it. And bill the taxpayers $500,000. Let's see. Republican Ohio says we will do it. The Democrat in the White House says we will not. So you figure this out now. Not endorsing anybody, just here. Last month, Boehner pumped up that spending to $1.5 million, drawing immediate fire from the Human Rights Campaign. The law firm King and Spalding dropped its involvement in defending the legislature after HRC helped lead the way to denounce the contract. Should be clear to you which party is which. Now, page 9. The President of the United States. You'll notice it really hasn't been since John Kennedy that we've had a happy president who smiles.
No, Clinton smiled.
Clinton smiled. President, here, now listen. We believe in a big America. President Barack Obama spoke at the Human Rights Campaign 15th National Dinner. Now, how many presidents of the other party have ever spoken at a Human Rights Campaign dinner? The second national HRC gala he has attended while in office. Excerpts of his address are following. He says, "It happens when a father realizes he doesn't just love his daughter, but also her wife." This is our president. "It happens when a soldier tells his unit he's gay, and they tell him they knew it all along, and they didn't care because he was the toughest guy in the unit. It happens when people look past their ultimately minor differences to see themselves in the hopes and struggles of their fellow human beings. That's where the change is happening. And it's not just the story of the gay rights movement, that's the story of America. The slow, inexorable march toward a more perfect union. You, HRC members there, are contributing to that story. And I am confident we can continue to write another chapter together. Together, we also have to keep sending a message to every young person in this country who might feel alone or afraid because they're gay or transgender, who may be getting picked on or pushed around because they're different. We've got to make sure they know that there are adults they can talk to, that they are never alone, that there is a whole world waiting for them, filled with possibility. That's why we held a summit at the White House on bullying. That's why we're going to continue to focus on this issue. This isn't just kids being kids. It's wrong. It's destructive. It's never acceptable. And I want all those kids to know that the President and the First Lady are standing right beside them every inch of the way. I want them to know that we love them and care about them, and they're not by themselves. That's what I want them to know. We live up to a creed that is as old as our founding. E pluribus unum, out of many, one. And that includes everybody. That's what we believe. That's what we're going to be fighting for. I am confident that's what the American people believe in. I'm confident because of the changes we've achieved this past 2.5 years, the progress that some folks said was impossible. It is progress led not by Washington, but by ordinary citizens who are propelled not just by politics, but by love and friendship and a sense of mutual regard. We believe in a big America, an America where everybody's got a fair shot and everyone pays their fair share. We don't believe in a small America. We don't believe in the kid of smallness that says it's okay for a stage full of political leaders, one of whom could end up being the President of the United States, being silent when an American soldier is booed.
Good for him.
All right? So, last night, to get the screen to be brighter. That stage full of political leaders met. And where did they meet? Does anybody know where they were last night? Des Moines, Iowa. Now listen to this. A gathering of religious conservatives in Iowa last night, turned into one of the most emotional moments in the 2012 primary season when two of the presidential candidates, Herman Cain and Rick Santorum, both fought back tears, telling about their personal stories about the most challenging moments in their lives. You can go to the thing on screen and see what those challenging moments were. And what I want you to hear. Six candidates, including Cain, Perry, Ron Paul, Bachmann, Santorum, and Newt Gingrich, used the venue to speak more expansively than before about their personal faith journey. In every person's heart, in every person's soul, there is a hole that can only be filled by the Lord Jesus Christ, Perry told the audience. By the way, you'll notice Mitt Romney was not here. Emotions gave way to politics. The candidates took the opportunity to attack Obamacare, Washington elites, the liberal establishment, and Occupy Wall Street protesters. And all tried to fit in their own campaign talking points. The name of the organization that sponsored this, I thought was right up here at the beginning here. There it is. The Family Leader. Does anybody remember the Family Leader from some other time? Fellow candidate Rick Perry, who was seated next to Cain at the forum, which is sponsored by the Christian conservative organization, the Family Leader. Where have you heard of them before? The Family Leader is that organization that had the marriage pledge I told you about a few weeks ago. Here's another article now on your screen by published in Politico. This was published July 8, 2011. Representative Michelle Bachmann and former Senator Rick Santorum have become the first signers of an Iowa organization's marriage vow, a pledge to uphold a wide-range social conservative agenda. The Family Leader's Declaration of Dependence upon Marriage and Family includes opposition to same-sex marriage at every level, a promise to support only judges who are faithful constitutionalists, and protecting women and children from pornography. It notes as the first piece of evidence toward its thesis that, quote, the institution of marriage in America is in great crisis, quote, that, quote, slavery has a disastrous impact on African American families, yet sadly a child born into slavery in 1860 was more likely to be raised by his mother and father in a two-parent household than an African American baby born after the election of U.S.A.'s first African American president. Okay, Veronica, you can jump through the internet now on screen. Isn't that unbelievable? They're actually saying that Afro-American slave children were in a better family structure than the current family structure under President Obama. I'm hearing crickets.
Is that true of families in general today, not just...
Yeah, but that's just terrible. They're actually saying slavery was better for children. This is horrible. Okay, so, yeah. By now they've all signed this, by the way. And now on your screen is their actual website, the Family Leader. Let me just read you a little bit here right away what it says here. Attention pastors. 167 religious leaders signed a letter delivered to the Iowa legislature saying that people of faith support homosexual marriage. Don't stay silent while others speak for you and misrepresent God. Read the pastor's letter to the Iowa legislature supporting marriage and then add your names to the list of signers. Click here to read. Because of their unwillingness to, or Chuck Hurley, because of their unwillingness to correct the error of last April's Iowa Supreme Court opinion, the Iowa legislature is responsible for sanctioning activities that will lead to dramatically higher levels of HIV. Can't quite see this here. Well, there's a screen on top of it. HIV and something in Iowa. Why Iowa needs Christian statesmen. Speaking at the Des Moines Airport Holiday Inn, IFPC Action Board Chairman Danny Carroll addresses the impact of past decisions that violated God's design for a successful and healthy society and the need to reverse that last April's Iowa Supreme Court opinion as soon as possible. If you want to know more on what is motivating IFPC action and stay active in the public arena, watch this video. Yeah, this is the family leader, okay? So, look, folks, please go through these websites. This is very, very serious. These people are part of that second group, the reconstructionists. They believe that homosexual persons, bisexual persons, transgender persons, anyone who's ever had an abortion, well, they don't get down on divorce anymore because most of them have had multiple marriages. It's kind of interesting. You know, they're supposed to be the ones that support marriage. Well, that's been redefined even in my lifetime. I mean, marriage was illegal in this country. I mean, divorce was illegal in this country. Okay, now you can have divorce after divorce after divorce. And see, they're okay with that because that's comfortable to them. Okay, so the ones who are defending marriage, I mean, you know, just look at the presidential candidates on that side. Some have had multiple marriages, and some, the next marriage was starting while still married to the current wife. But they're supporting marriage. So that political party, folks, has a set agenda against marriage equality, which is why we bring this up today. This is why we bring this up today. And so they see that anybody who is gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, questioning, anyone who's in any of those categories and in certain races and certain religions are holding back the return of Christ. So their agenda is to clean up the country with government so that Christ can return. All right. Our agenda here at Ray of Hope is to encourage you to be informed. Please do not fall for their trap, which is keep your faith private. They tell us to keep our faith private. Well, they're in the newspaper and in every kind of media every day of the week with their faith, and they're taking over our military chaplaincies. So there's a lot of work to be done. And kids are hearing both sides of this argument, and depending on where they live in this country, you know, they're still being made to feel like they have no self-worth, or they're being affirmed. It depends on where they live. And that's why federal laws are needed, to smooth out the mountains and valleys of how this is treated. Just as we needed federal laws to smooth out racism. There's still problems with racism, but federal law put, you know, a level playing field. That's what's needed for sexual orientation and gender expression as well. The church is not the kingdom, but the church has the responsibility to express the ideals that Christ gave us in the arena of our society. So let's continue to work together and continue to keep Christ as the King of our hearts as we go, proclaiming the gospel of liberty and justice for all.